like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order at 6:54. Roll call, Mr. Van Truren.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Mr. Dembinski.
Here.
Mr. Winarski. Mr. Nahorn.
Present.
Chair is here. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to excuse Mr. Winarski and Mr. Ramsey, they have letter of complaint.
Mr. Nahorn.
Second, please.
All those in favor of excusing Mr. Winarski and Mr. Ramsey from tonight's meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those like sign, they are excused. One item on the agenda, A1847, reappropriate funds in the Auditor's Department from workers' compensation to part-time wages in the amount of $2,000, be coming from account 100-7004-52125, workers' compensation account, going to 100-7004-52113, part-time wages. It's funds needed due to extra hours worked in the part-time during the audit and year end. Anyone wishing to speak on it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Patek.
Carol Schauber, our payroll clerk, has worked an extensive amount of hours over the limit, and to cover through the rest of the year, we're taking money from workers' comp and putting it into part-time wages, and it's about $2,000 to cover through the rest of the year. So, but Gwen, our deputy auditor, will manage her time closely so that she doesn't exceed the 30 hours through the rest of the year, so that we don't have to come around again and ask for any more reappropriations. That's about it.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Move to take A1847 to the council.
Dembinski.
Second with comment. Can I friendly amend that to take the floor of council with emergency?
Mr. Auditor?
I think I need to cut
Yes, sir.
wages.
Need emergency then?
Yeah, I believe we do need the emergency. Thank you.
Would you like to include that in your motion, Mr. Miller?
Yes, I just was looking at it and asked for emergency. If you need emergency on this, I amend my motion to as such. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Dembinski.
Still second.
Further comments or questions on this? Seeing none, all those in favor of taking A1847 to the floor of council with the emergency signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 6-0. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Janik.
Second.
All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We stand adjourned at 7:50.
call the regular meeting of the Amherst City Council on October 8th, 2018 at 7 p.m. to order. Roll call vote, please. Roll call, please.
Mr. Nahorn?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Janik?
Here.
Mr. Van Turen?
Here.
Mr. Dubinsky?
Here.
Mr. Cowger?
Here.
Mr. Winarski?
Mr. Cowper.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mr. Winarski from tonight's meeting. He has a letter on file.
Mr. Van Turen.
Second that.
There's a motion and a second to excuse Mr. Winarski from tonight's meeting. He has a letter on file. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. Mr. Dubinsky.
Move to excuse Mr. Ramsey. He has a letter on file.
Mr. Janik.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to excuse Mr. Ramsey. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. Both Mr. Winarski and Mr. Ramsey are excused. Will you please stand for the prayer by Chaplain Nahorn and pledge the flag by Sergeant at Arms Dubinsky.
Please join me in bowing your heads. Gracious God, with the Columbus Day holiday this month, themes of discovery and rediscovery come to mind. As representatives in our government, let us work to always attempt to discover all of the information that we may need to seek in answering a question or working through a task, with the ultimate goal of properly and fully representing the citizens of Amherst. And now let the words of our mouths and meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your vision. Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll go to item 4 on the agenda, the consent agenda.
Minutes of the regular council meeting held September 24th, 2018. Minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held October 8th, 2018.
Mr. Dubinsky.
Move to accept the consent agenda as read.
Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
There's a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda as read. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. The consent agenda is accepted. We will go now to item 5 on the agenda, acknowledgement of the public pertaining to items on the agenda. Is there anyone here tonight wishing to speak on any of the items that are on the agenda? Seeing no one wishing to speak, we will go on to item 6A, ordinances and resolutions, first reading.
An ordinance reappropriating funds in various accounts and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Calver.
Make a motion to suspend council rules so that item 6A may be passed on the first reading.
Mr. Janik.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to suspend the rule that requires 3 readings so that item 6A can be passed on the first reading. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dubinsky?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. That rule is suspended. Mr. Calver.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Dubinsky.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dubinsky?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
It'll be ordinance 01833.
Go on to item 7, ordinances and resolutions, second reading. Item 7A, please.
An ordinance authorizing the purchase and installation of equipment necessary for improved video recording and broadcast of municipal meetings not to exceed $50,000.
Mr. Van Turen.
Move to send item 7A on to the third reading.
Mr. Calgar?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to send item 7A onto the third reading. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Calgar?
Yes.
Item passes 6-0. It is passed on to the third reading. Come to item 8, ordinances and resolutions, third reading. 8A, please.
An ordinance repealing chapters 1341, 1342, and 1344 of Part 13, Title 3 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Amherst and enacting a new chapter 1340 entitled Property Maintenance, which adopts the International Property Maintenance Code 2015 edition, including Appendix A, thereto relating to boarding standards, with certain amendments and additional provisions, and amending Section 112503 of the Codified Ordinances to grant jurisdiction to the Board of Zoning Appeals to hear and determine appeals from decisions, notices, or orders of the code official acting under the International Property Maintenance Code.
Mr. Van Turen.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt. Comments or questions, please? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Calgar?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Item 8A is adopted.
You'll be on ordinance 01834.
Item 8B, please.
An ordinance renewing for a period of 10 years the present 0.5% income tax levy previously approved and passed by the electors on November 3rd, 2009, subject to passage and approval of the voters of the City of Amherst at the primary election on May 7th, 2019.
Mr. Calgar.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt item 8B. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Calgar?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Item 8B is adopted.
It'll be ordinance 01835.
Item 8C, please.
A resolution to place on the ballot for the primary election to be held on May 7th, 2019, the question of renewing the 0.5% income tax levy previously passed on November 3rd, 2009, with the 0.5% income tax levy.
Mr. Calgar.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Janik.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to adopt item 8C. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Calgar?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Item 8C is adopted.
It'll be resolution R1809.
We will go on to item 9, miscellaneous and acknowledgement of the public. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on any topic? Seeing no one wishing to speak, we'll go on to item 10, agenda requests and committee meeting schedule.
To finance A 1848, resolution accepting amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor. To finance A 1849, accept grant from FEMA in the amount of $313,396 with a 5% match of $15,669 from local funds for the purchase of radios and radio equipment.
I will call in chairman now. Finance, Mr. Calver.
Yes, 2 items for October 15th, 2018 at 7 p.m. First item, A1848 as read. Second item, A1849 as read. And that is complete, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Building and Lands, Mr. Van Truin.
No items at this time, please cancel.
Streets, Mr. Van Truin.
No items at this time, Madam President, please cancel.
Thank you. Community Development, Mr. Miller.
No items, please cancel.
Executive, Mr. Miller.
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Ordinance, Mr. Dembinski.
No items at this time, Madam President, please cancel.
Thank you. Utilities, Mr. Janik.
No items, Madam President, please cancel.
Thank you. Recycle, Mr. Nahorn.
Please keep recycling.
Thank you. Technology, Mr. Dembinski.
No items at this time, Madam President, please cancel.
Thank you. Police and Fire, Mr. Miller.
No items, Madam President, please cancel.
Thank you. Annexation, Mr. Van Truin.
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. So the committee meeting that we're calling is going to be for 7 o'clock this coming Monday, the 15th at 7 p.m., and that will be finance. Any additions, you will be notified ahead of time. We'll go to item 11, reports of the administration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Pedek?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sent out the month-end financial reports for September earlier today. Apologize for the delay. That is the end of the report.
Thank you. Mr. Pecora?
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffries?
No report, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. I'll just speak one moment quickly about our electric rates. A lot of people are questioning how we come up with the PPA and the WSA. A lot of folks are thinking we just throw a dart out there and make up a rate, any rate we want, because that's what we want to do. But our rate consultant takes a 3-month average of what our costs were for purchasing that electric, the purchase power adjustment. So that's what we're charging fairly, is what we've paid over the last 3 months. 3 months isn't a very big average, so I really am considering maybe lengthening that average so that we would be a little more consistent, maybe going to a 6-month rolling average. I really haven't done the analysis yet to see what that would do, but that might keep it more consistent. But this is just the way we keep our rates as close to what we're paying for power as we can. So it's not a guess. It really is an average of the last 3 months of what we've paid for power. And that's that little tiny amount at the end now. It's either a little plus a few cents or minus a little bit, a few dollars, now the PPA. And other than that, that's the end of my report, unless there's questions on how we do that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. So a lot of people are under the assumption that the rates have gone up way more than the small percentage that we increased on council floor. Is this the case? Is it due to a higher purchase cost?
When the city, when the city as a whole, when we have those really hot months, we have to buy that extra peak power, and the peak power is very expensive. So the more peak power we buy, the more that PPA ends up costing at the end of the day. So that's our biggest reason for the last couple of months spike. It should start leveling off and coming down as we don't, because there are times we don't buy that peak power at all, and that is just our, we pretty much just our portfolio and that remaining requirements, and that's when our rates are at its lowest. So I think maybe taking that rolling average out a few more months, I'll see what that does to trying to make it more consistent. But being a municipality, we only have so much money we keep on hand. We have to pay for electric we purchase each month. So that's the reason we do that.
Thank you.
I probably rambled on more than you asked for, but I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you. No more further questions you have time.
Thank you. Any further questions for the mayor or his staff? Mr. Calver.
Move to accept the reports of the administration.
Mr. Nahon.
Second, please.
There's a motion and a second to accept the reports of the administration. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion carries 6-0. The reports of the administration are accepted. We'll go to item 12 on the agenda. Acknowledgement of the receipt of the monthly reports from the auditor and the treasurer. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to acknowledge the receipt of the monthly reports from the auditor and treasurer.
Thank you. Mr. Calver.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to acknowledge the receipt of the monthly reports from the auditor and treasurer. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. The monthly reports of the auditor and treasurer are formally acknowledged. Thank you. Item 13, adjournment. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Keller.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion carried 6-0. We are adjourned at 7:20 p.m. Thank you.
No.
Right?
Yeah.